What are core abilities for a pro freestyler? It's a big subject because freestyling is, of course, not just one skill. It's the composite of a whole bunch of different smaller skills that get bundled together to allow somebody to be a great freestyle rapper. You know, in the same way that we chunk together words for bits of vocabulary, we also chunk together skills to create what is just called one skill. You know, being a great basketball player, you have to develop your dribbling, you have to develop your ball handling, you have to develop your shooting, close range, you know, distance. Yeah, obviously I'm not a sports guy, but you got to develop all these things to be great at playing, to be a great basketball player, right? And the same is true for freestyling. So I think there are kind of like different categories of skills and abilities within the umbrella of freestyling. Like there are the skills that pertain specifically to the craft of being able to spit a freestyle rhyme, just period, in any context. And then there are like skills that pertain to, I would say, showmanship and like just general professionalism as a musician in general. And there are certain other skills too that have been particularly relevant to my path that may or may not be relevant to somebody else's path as a freestyler. Just depends on how they choose to express themselves through this art form. Like as an example, I have focused a lot on my memory in recent years because I wanted to be able to be given a whole bunch of different word suggestions up top and hold them all in my mind palace, so to speak, and then kind of navigate through them over the course of a freestyle. But if you're not, you know, getting words from random people while you're freestyling, then that might not be something that you need to focus on as much. I've also focused a lot, whether I knew it or not, through the years on sort of like social awareness and making people feel comfortable and understanding how to relate positively to all different types of people, which is really meaningful to me and has helped me a lot in my career, I believe. But that's because I'm out there on the street, you know, stopping strangers in the middle of their day and asking for their time. And so it's important that I'm able to make people feel comfortable and keep everything cool. But again, if you're just freestyling in studios or in ciphers with other rappers, that may or may not be relevant to you. So I think what I can do is try to talk about sort of what I consider the core abilities for just being able to rap, and then maybe some of the kind of showmanship professional things that I think might be relevant. We could do a whole episode on this, so I'll try not to go too long. But I think just keeping it kind of zoomed out and baseline, to be a great freestyler, you have to become fluent in rhyme, right? You got to be able to rhyme, obviously. And we call it rhyming, or spit a rhyme, you know? So rhyming is obviously one of the kind of basic rules, and I put rules in air quotes because rules are meant to be broken, and there are plenty of examples of moments within rap where it doesn't necessarily rhyme. But by and large, 99.9% of the time, it has to rhyme. So to be able to rhyme spontaneously, you have to sort of build that rhyming vocabulary inside your own brain, you know? And rhyming, I think, comes really naturally to some people, and other people have to work a little harder at it. But I think anybody can become really competent at rhyming. And, you know, one of the great ways to do that is by just listening to as much hip hop as possible, which, by the way, should be a prerequisite to all of this. Like, nobody should be trying to become a pro freestyler if they're not already deeply in love with hip hop. You know, the two things go hand in hand. And so, you know, yeah, you want to be, if you're not in love with this genre and culture, then there's no reason to go, obviously. But yeah, what are you doing? So you're already probably listening to a ton of hip hop, and therefore you probably already have a pretty good ear for rhyme. But yeah, you need to be able to quickly come up with a lot of different rhymes for any word that you're given, such as, give me a word.
Sharp,
stark, dark, narc, arp, which is short for arpeggio in the synth world. So
that
yeah,
would have been a better word. Arpeggio.
Arpeggio, heavy flow, deadly though. You ain't ready, bro. And then those were examples of multisyllabic rhymes, right? So you also need to get comfortable with multisyllabic rhymes and being able to sort of find rhymes and multisyllabic rhymes in real time and sort of piece those together is a skill that builds over time just through repetition and practice and listening and exposing yourself to as many different styles of rhyming as possible.
What is that at its core? Like the rhyming, like, is that like dialect? Just, you know, it's like a way with words. Like some people that rhyme, like I think of Juice WRLD just is like effortlessly rhymes things that you wouldn't expect. It's like, it's almost, he just has a more open mind on what is even available to use.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is. It's almost like an English teacher should be great at freestyling then, but it's not that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think a lot of times when somebody seems effortless at making words rhyme that on paper they don't rhyme, or it wouldn't seem like those options are available to most people, but inexplicably they're available to somebody like Juice WRLD. A lot of that has to do with becoming comfortable with slant rhymes, right? Which are words that don't rhyme perfectly, but they still sound like they rhyme. And that, like, if you want to get technical, it has to do
I do.
with, yeah, it has to do with the long vowel, or the emphasized vowel sound of the word. So, like, for example, did you say sharp?
Sharp.
Yeah, sharp.
Yeah.
I think the first word I rhymed with it was shark, which is a slant rhyme.
Yeah.
So, and the reason is the reason they work is because that emphasized vowel sound of R is the same between sharp and shark,
Yeah.
and same as heart, which is another slant rhyme, but the ending consonant is different. So obviously sharp ends with that P sound, shark ends with that K sound, and I think I said heart next ends with that T sound. So the ending consonant can sort of be different, but as long as that emphasized vowel sound is the same, then you're going to get a slant rhyme.
I just don't know how you get like better at that. Like, like how do you, it's almost like some people just have like a more of an awareness.
Well, for me, I think the awareness came through just massive exposure to like through listening to rap, and then massive exploration on my own time. I always remember this camping trip I went on with two of my best friends, Daniel and Brett. Shout out to Daniel and Brett. And we went on this epic camping trip in high school. We went to these dunes in Oregon. I think it was called Honey something, National Park. And it has these big sand dunes. And we went there, just the three of us, to camp. It was awesome. And I drove up there in my Volvo. And it was just an amazing time. But I just remember, like, those guys don't rap. But I just remember one afternoon, I was just listing off these multi-syllabic rhymes. I can't remember what I was on, but I was like, something like, I'm taking you down. You fake with the sound. And they were like, And I was like, I'm shaking you now. I'm staying profound. Every day I get found in a way that's profound. I just like kept on going like forever and ever and ever. And I would just do that all the time. And you might say, well, yeah, okay, fine. But how were you able to do that? And, because it started with simple one-syllable rhymes. It started with saying hand, stand, sand, bland. There's this thing you can do where you go through the whole alphabet and say, oh, is there an A word that rhymes with hand? And. Is there a B word that rhymes with hand? Band. Is there a C word that rhymes with hand? Canned? Maybe canned goods. So and so that's one way you can attack it. But yeah, if you start with simple one-syllable words, like that's a great framework if you've never tried this before. And then you can start working on multisyllabic rhymes, because often multisyllabic rhymes are just various combinations of these shorter sounds. They're always inevitably just various combinations of these shorter sounds. So if you're really familiar with like basic one-syllable rhymes, because you go through the alphabet, or you just like ask yourself what rhymes with that, and you write down little lists. Just like anything else, you just have to practice it and expose yourself to it constantly. And then, you'll, I think, develop an ear for it, where it feels less like you have to consider what rhymes with something. And it feels more like you're just sort of intuitively, these rhyming options are just sort of intuitively being shown to you as you go. That's what you want to get to. Like, I never think about rhyming really when I'm freestyling. The only time that I have to think about it is if I'm suddenly faced with a word where I'm like, damn, what the fuck rhymes with that? Which does happen sometimes. And then that's where that'll interrupt the flow state, because I have to be like, oh, damn, back to the bit. What would I even rhyme with that? But most of the time I'm not really thinking about like what rhymes with this or what rhymes with that. They're just sort of like emerging, in real time, because I've just spent so much time thinking about it.
That's a wild statement, though. Harry Mack doesn't even really think about rhyming that much.
Oh, and I would say this too. I think this is an important point. I think that one of the most underrated things you can practice if you're trying to be a great freestyler is writing rhymes. And I don't say that enough. But the thing is, I wrote rhymes from 5th grade through, and I still write rhymes now, but I mainly wrote rhymes. Like, I wasn't like, oh yeah, I mostly freestyle, but I just write because it means a lot to me. It was like, no, I mostly write. I write rhymes, and then we freestyle for fun. So I did both, but like I mainly wrote rhymes from like 5th grade through like high school, like senior year of high school. It was only in college when I started to be like, man, I just want to go ham on improvising, like, and make that the main thing. But for all those years, I was learning what rhymes with the luxury of infinite time, which also rhymes. So I would just be at home in my bedroom writing a rap. So in that case, you literally write the word and then you think like, what rhymes with that? That's an option. Okay, I write it in the margin. I don't know if I like it. Here's 4 more options. And then on the 5th one, you're like, oh, that's fire. That fits. And you put that one in. So that process right there, like that's you learning about rhyming. And in some ways, I think that's more creative and more fun than just like writing the word hand, putting a line under it, and then writing sand, bland, band, command. Like that's cool. That's good practice. And you can do that if that appeals to you. And I did stuff like that because I'm a nerd. But, and it's good to be a nerd. So, be a nerd. But more than that, I just wrote rhymes. And through writing rhymes, you're already doing that. You're already like asking yourself what rhymes with that, going through various options, picking one you like, slotting it in, and learning how to do everything that you're going to do in a freestyle, but you're just learning it without the clock on the chess game. So it's infinitely valuable. And I think it's probably a lot harder to just like become a great freestyler if you don't also like compose and write rhymes. So yeah, that would be my thought on that piece. Wow, we're only on the first piece, so let me try to summarize. But yeah,
obviously, super interesting, though, man.
Yeah, no, for sure. I love talking about this shit. We should do a whole episode just on mechanics. But you have to become fluent in rhyme, which takes time, and then you have to become fluent in rhythm. I mean, those. If you're only going to have two things that you think about for your frame of reference, those are the two most important. You have to learn how to be in rhythm and be in the pocket, because you could have all the amazing rhyming vocabulary in the world, but if you don't have a good feel, like if you can't connect to the beat in a way that's musical and rhythmic, then you're not going to be able to get your message out to the people in a way that sounds good. I think that rhythm is arguably the most important part, but they're both critical. So you can't really say one's more important than the other. But without rhythm, the whole thing falls apart. And I'm very lucky in the sense that I've been a musician since I was 7, and I've been playing the drums for as long as I've been rapping, and my drumming massively influences my approach to freestyling and my understanding of rhythm. I was a jazz drummer, and so I played improvisational music and I improvised in rhythm. And I'm just taking all of those concepts that I learned as a drummer for how to improvise in rhythm, and they're sort of supplying the backbone of rhythmic information when I'm out there freestyling. You don't have to learn how to play the drums to be a good freestyler, though, with great rhythm, because there's lots of great freestylers and great rappers in general who have just approached it as rappers. But I think some people have a natural kind of knack for rhythm. I think I always had kind of this rhythmic feeling inside my body, and I've always really connected to rhythm. Like I like doing the jump rope and stuff when I was, I just like things that are rhythmic. And some people don't have that, but you can always become competent with enough repetition and exposure. And I think you can learn a lot just by listening to rap. Like your favorite rappers are probably have really great rhythm, unless you're listening to like a lot of really weird abstract underground stuff that I'm not familiar with. But, if you just listen and rap along to the greats, you're learning about rhythm and you're starting to absorb that. But you need to have that part for sure. So you have to be fluent in rhyme, fluent in rhythm. And I think one other thing that's really underrated too, about learning how to freestyle is, okay, you can have the rhyming vocabulary and you can have, the rhythm as well. And then you can start to learn about some basic structures. I guess I should say that next. You have to learn about some basic structures, like the rhyming couplet, which is just 2 lines of poetry that end with a rhyme. I've talked about that a bunch. And then you can learn about how the rhyming couplet can kind of flow in 2 directions. It can be this sort of free flow through composed thing where you basically just think of a random word that goes at the end of line 1, and then you think of something that rhymes with it, and that goes at the end of line 2. That's a great way to do it. It can be incredibly powerful as long as you have a really rich rhyming vocabulary. Or it can flow the other direction, which is like what I call setup punchline, where you think of the word that you want to target and you save it for the end of line 2, and you work backwards to come up with a word that rhymes with it at the end of line 1. I've talked about that a whole bunch. We can link to the video too, where I go in depth on it, but you can learn some of these basic structures, get familiar with them, so that you have control over where you're placing the rhyme. And then, and this is what I wanted to mention initially, I think a really underrated aspect of freestyling at a professional level is working on the skill of taking a word and having it suggest a coherent phrase to you that ends in that word. So that sounds kind of complicated. What do I mean? Like if the word is coffee, like because I have coffee right here, can you improvise a coherent phrase that makes sense, that fits roughly within one measure of music? So there's the rhythmic part that ends with coffee. Like my flows wake you up like you sipping on the coffee. Can you do another one? I stay on my grind like the beans for the coffee. Can you do another one? I hit up Starbucks daily for my morning coffee. Maybe that's true for you. Maybe it's not. Can you do another one? Like take a trip to Colombia for that bomb coffee. And how many can you come up with? How creative can you be with like a coherent rhythmic phrase that ends with the word coffee? And then with the next word, and then with the next word. And I think this is such an underrated aspect of the skill that I don't ever really hear talked about that much. Everybody knows you got to learn how to rhyme. Everybody knows you got to have rhythm, but I think this part is underrated. I never really even thought about it myself, but being able to extract a phrase that makes sense from words in real time. And if you can't do that, I feel like that's where a lot of amateurs that I hear struggle a lot is they have their rhymes together, but sometimes they're rhyming in a way where it's like all of the content in between the rhymes doesn't really make that much sense or mean that much. And so it comes across as just kind of this random smattering of rhyming sounds. So that would be like, you won't stop me with the coffee off me when I'm in a lobby. It's like, okay, like we're getting somewhere. Like it's cool that you have those rhymes and it might be more or less in rhythm, but it doesn't really say anything. And so for me, it's like the way that we express ourselves and communicate through freestyle is in the gaps in between the rhyming words. So you could take similar words to what I just used in that example, and just by mastering the skill of extracting phrasing, you can turn it into like, my flows wake you up like you sipping on the coffee. Haters in my path, I make them back up off me. I keep it clean when I rhyme, never sloppy. 5-star hotel when I'm in the lobby. Right? So that's basically the same, and it's not always 5-star when I'm in the lobby, but I'm just flexing. Those are the same basic, well, I don't know if they're exactly the same, but similar to the words that I had from the first example, but it's so much stronger because you're saying something about each and every one of those words. And those phrases are being suggested by the words. So as you think of the rhyming word, you're like, well, what could I say about that ends with that makes sense and sort of like pushes this whole thing forward? I think that's just like so huge. And the cool thing is you can practice that without a beat playing. You can practice that out of time. You can practice it as its own thing. Like you might just like, or you could, so yeah, you could do it totally out of rhythm, or you could start doing it in rhythm and just every line ends with the same word. Like give me another word.
Lamp.
Lamp. When I spit, I'm lit, something like a lamp. Turn up the lumen, shine bright like a lamp. 1,000,000 watts when my brain shines like a lamp. Ding! New idea, over my dome, there's a lamp. I guide you, something like a lighthouse lamp. Chilling in the studio, I love to lamp. All right, so people say lamp to mean chilling, right? So you can use other meanings of the word too when you get tired of using the same meaning. But that is obviously not a rhyme that you would want to share or do on stage or anything like that, because every line is ending with the exact same word. It's clearly an exercise. But it's a really effective exercise to get used to this concept of like, it's not all about thinking of the next rhyming word and having 1,000,000 rhyming words. I would argue that it's that you could be a more effective freestyler with far fewer rhyming options, but a really strong ability to fill in the spaces between the words and to keep those spaces as open as possible, and this relates to kind of like what I was saying previously, where sometimes I'll have my licks where I'll get stuck sometimes where like every time I see a word, I say the same thing about it, So like I shake them up and I wake them up like the coffee. I've said that a whole bunch of times. So how can I train to keep that space more open so that when I see coffee, I don't always just say the same phrase, but I feel like the space is open for me to be creative in that moment and put a new phrase there.
That exercise is so interesting. I've never heard you mention that specific one.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about this recently where I'm like, man, what is the unlock? And I think for a lot of people, that would be the thing to work on.
Just the sheer fact that you don't run out of like ideas of sentences to say when we're out there.
Yeah.
Like, when you're freestyling is just like, it's just impressive. The rhyming itself is obviously like the big payoff, but the fact that you have so much to say, like a lot of people would see that and they're like, how does he just know what to say?
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you. And I think it is a skill that you develop. Yeah. And I think we trick ourselves early on in the journey of trying to learn how to do this. We trick ourselves into thinking, well, if I just had more rhyming words, then that would allow me to say more. Mm-hmm. But I don't actually agree with that. I think it's what you say about the rhyming word that leads into the rhyming word that makes it coherent. And I think like sometimes people will hear my freestyles and be like, bro, it's amazing because it's always funny to me when people say this, but they're like, you went for 10 minutes and it all made sense. which is a
Yeah.
funny compliment. Like,
That's what I'm saying, though.
yeah, but it's like, I think that thing that they're hearing that differentiates it, and I'm by no means the only one that does that, because there are lots of great freestylers that do this incredibly well, many of whom I've learned from, but that's what they're identifying is that coherency of phrasing.
Yeah.
Not just like, oh, you had a million rhyming words, like that's a thing too. You can, off the top of this apocalypse, dropping hits while I'm stocked with, whatever. You can do that whole lyrical miracle thing, and it's great, and I love it. But when they say the whole thing made sense, it's like every phrase, ideally, I'm saying something coherent that would make sense.
Yeah, we're following along the whole time.
Yeah.
That's cool, man.
This is an awesome question. I want to do a whole pod just about this, but I don't want to talk for too long. So I would also just say, in terms of being a pro freestyler, there are a lot of showmanship things to consider. Learning how to end your freestyle really solidly, like having a solid, you could have a signature sign off, filling y'all with joy. If y'all are rocking with me, someone make some noise, right? That's one that I've used many, many times. So you can just have a library of kind of like ending phrases. Or you can just get really good at ending on a unique phrase every time, or you can end with the last word suggestion. There's a lot of ways to do it, but that's really important, I think, from a professionalism standpoint. And there's a million other things to talk about.